Hello, Brobs. We're back with another book I will start reading now. Three Loves of Dostoevsky by Marc Slonim. I believe it's 1955-ish. Reinhardt and Company, Marc Slonim, 1955. To Tanya. I believe there's a foreword, so it's not very long. I will get that out of the way, and then I will get on with the book. This book is a narrative. Actually, I already read this, didn't I? In the first introduction. Yeah, because it had the thing about he supposedly a child. All right, let's get right on to the book. Part 1, Maria, the first love. I hate that. Looks like a nuclear disaster symbol of some sort. Let's go. Early in the morning of the 22nd of December, 1849, Baron Alexander Wrangel, a 16-year-old cadet at the Alexandrovsky Lycée, looked out of his window and saw, in the dismal murk of a St. Petersburg winter, a string of sleigh coaches, each drawn by two horses. Such coaches were usually favored by the pupils of the Smolny Institute for Aristocratic Young Ladies, or by the girls studying ballet at the Imperial Theatrical School. This morning, however, instead of pretty young girls, the coaches were carrying political criminals. 20 members of the Petrushevsky group were being driven to their execution. Their arrest at the beginning of the year had made a great stir in the society of the northern capital. It was rumored that the secret police had unearthed a plot against the Tsar, that the group believed in socialism, civil rights, emancipation of the peasants, and other outrageous ideas. Michael Petrushevsky, Budashevich, leader of the revolutionaries, as well as some of his friends, N. Speshnev, N. Kashkin, Al. Europeus, were graduates of the very lycée in which Wrangel was enrolled, and consequently the gendarmes had raided its classes in search of subversive literature. Wrangel had naturally become interested in the affair of the Petrushevists, as they were called, but one could hardly discuss them, except among other closest friends, and even then only in a lowered voice. It was said that Tsar Nicholas I was angry and disturbed and wanted the member of the group severely punished as a public example. Karl Igorovich Manderstern, subsequently the commandant of the fortress of Saints Peter and Paul, a relative of Wrangel's, had acted as adjutant general, or is that adjutant general, on the military tribunal that sat in judgment of the Petrushevists, and it was from him that the young cadet had learned, while home for the Christmas vacation, that many of them had been sentenced to execution before a firing squad. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky was one of the condemned. Very recently, Wrangel had read Poor Folk, the novel which had laid the foundation of Dostoevsky's reputation as a writer, and his unfinished tale, Natachka Nezvanova. Both had made a strong impression on the boy, and he was very much grieved to learn that the writer he admired was about to die. On the memorable morning of the 22nd of December, Wrangel's uncle, an officer in the Horse Guards, had to be present with his company at the execution of the Petrushevists. He agreed to take his nephew along. When they arrived at Semenovsky Place, where the execution was to be carried out, they found a cordon of troops already tangled in a hollow square. Behind the black ranks of the soldiers milled the idle populace. Muziks, I don't know how to say it, peddlers, rabble in sheepskin jackets and short overcoats. There were practically no spectators of the better sort. Another kinsman of Wrangel's, also an officer wearing full dress, hurried over and begged him to leave without delay. Otherwise, the curious cadet might be seen, might even, through some misfortune, be suspected of criminal sympathy for the condemned men. Wrangel became a little scared and promised to go home. He did not leave, however, but lost himself in the crowd. This bold action he kept a secret, which he dared not share with anyone. By standing on tiptoe and craning his neck, he could see a wooden scaffold in the middle of the square and some posts set into the ground. The condemned men, 9 on one side of the scaffold and 11 on the other, had been stripped of their outer garments and were standing in the 20-degree frost only in their shirts. Wrangel heard a clerk reading out the sentence, Dostoevsky, Fyodor Mikhailovich, for participation in criminal designs and for the promulgation of a letter by the literator Belinsky. The said letter filled with scurrilities against the Orthodox Church and the reigning power, and for the attempt, in collusion with others, to disseminate by means of a lithographic process certain writings against the government, is deprived of all property rights, condemned to be shot to death. A priest with a cross replaced the officer on the scaffold and called upon the condemned to make their last confessions. Only one man approached to be shriven. The others merely put their lips to the silver cross when the priest quickly and silently held it up to each one. Then shrouds were put on Petrushevsky, Mombelli, and Grigorov, and those 3 were blindfolded and tied to posts. Dostoevsky was waiting his turn in the next group. A platoon led by an officer ranged itself before the post. The soldiers brought up their guns and took aim, but just as the command of fire was about to be given, one of the higher officers waved a white handkerchief. The execution was halted, and the condemned were untied from their post. Grigorov was swaying. He had gone insane during these few minutes of waiting for the end. Mombelli's hair had turned white. The new sentence was read out, commutation through the Tsar's grace, 4 years at hard labor and another 4 years of military servitude, both terms to be served in Siberia, was Dostoevsky's punishment. I can't say it. The victims were allowed to put on their jackets and overcoats. Wrangel stole out of the crowd, trembling with excitement and pity, and hastened home without waiting to see them carried off to the fortress of Saints Peter and Paul. 4 years later, in 1853, after his graduation from the Lycée, Wrangel served briefly in the Ministry of Justice, and at his own request was appointed prosecutor in the recently established Semipalatinsk area, consisting of the southeastern regions of the Kyrgyz steppes and the southwestern Altai district. At the time, Siberia had been little explored, and Wrangel was drawn to remote parts. He was more interested in travel and hunting than in jurisprudence. When his appointment became known in St. Petersburg, he was fated to hear the name of Dostoevsky once more. The former Petrushevist had just finished his penal servitude in Omsk, and on the 7th of March, 1854, was enrolled as a private in the 7th Siberian Battalion of the line stationed at Semipalatinsk. I know I'm botching all these. Michael Dostoevsky asked the new prosecutor to carry a letter and some money to his brother Fyodor, and the young man promptly agreed. In November 1854, Wrangel at last reached Semipalatinsk, and having barely taken up his quarters at the house of a local merchant, sent word to Dostoevsky to call. It seemed to him that they had known each other for a long time, and he impatiently awaited his meeting with the ex-writer, ex-convict, and now private of the line. When Dostoevsky came into the room, Wrangel could not take his eyes off this stocky soldier in his baggy uniform of coarse cloth. Everything about his appearance, figure, and dress was plebeian. He decidedly did not seem to belong to the gentry or the intelligentsia. His face, too, was the sort one often finds in Russia among artisans, burghers, and God-fearing merchants. A wiry, ruddy, spade-shaped beard, a thin and stubborn mouth under a thick mustache, light, closely cropped hair over a broad brow, the eyes with bluish shadows under them, so deep sunken that they seemed to have fallen through. His face was of an unhealthy color, ashen, freckled, the skin of the cheeks and forehead furrowed with wrinkles. His voice was stifled, somewhat hoarse, the consequence of a throat ailment, and he spoke quietly, sparingly, as though unwilling to talk, choosing simple words. When he grew animated, however, his speech became sonorous and rapid. His words rang with passion. He almost spluttered. His movements, despite their impulsiveness, became lively and easy. He was transformed, and not a trace remained of his former moroseness. Tears came to Dostoevsky's eyes as he read his brother's letter. Just then, mail from Russia was brought up to Wrangel, and recalling how remote his own family in St. Petersburg were, and watching his caller's exhausted, suffering face, he could not restrain his own tears. The young bureaucrat and the political criminal exchanged looks and embraced. This moment marked the beginning of their friendship. Wrangel was 21 at the time. Dostoevsky was 33. And that's going to be the end of section 1. Hell yeah. All right, bros. That's all, bruv. 2 awaits us. Chew.